Hey guys, and welcome back to another React. Today we have EVE Online's massive virtual wars and how they're financed. I think this will be great because it's going to apply to Star Citizen in aspects, and we can kind of see how they relate. You guys know me, PvP background, PvP organization, so this fascinates me because the more the Star Citizen game economy is dependent on organizations rather than invisible NPCs in the form of quanta, the more exciting and interesting it is for me. So I'm really, really hopeful that the economy isn't going to be as much as has been described by Quanta and more so in the community's hands. When you think of a player economy, you think of EVE Online, right? Because that's what the videos came out. That's what university professors were studying at the time. That is where the news articles came from, all that jazz. Star Citizen, and other games that had generic economies like World of Warcraft, New World, those kind of games, MMOs. Those economies were really stale, boring, and generic. There was nothing written about them. Nothing interesting happened. They didn't create stories, and that is why I am much, much in love with the idea of a player-driven economy where organizations, trade alliances, sections of the community like piracy being dependent on PvE players, being dependent on miners in high security systems, kind of like EVE for the resources, and having to get them, extract them out of high security into the lower null security systems. Just an interesting ecosystem between players, organizations, and different ways of playing the game, rather than something that is glued together and achieved through, a lot of behind the scenes magic that I feel cheapens the economy. I like the idea of going on the Star Citizen subreddit and reading about trade deals, how this group's made a killing doing this certain aspect of the economy and have made use of this certain opportunity. Just, I want things to be interesting and changing shape. And I feel like with a generic PvE driven economy, it's just bland, very bland. Those Tony Z presentations, I'm very skeptic of. I just can't see how it translates to fun for me. You guys know my take. Swimming a bit upstream. I know it's not a popular take, wanting a player-driven economy. Maybe you guys can let me know in the comments. What do you think? Are you leaning towards a player-driven economy? What type of economy do you want? And what did you think of Tony Z's economy? That can be what we discussed today. And I won't waste any more time. Let's get into the video.
EVE Online, a massively multiplayer online spaceship game, which is probably best known for two things.
I think this is a Mercurial, I think. If I remember right. Or Mercurial.
Making headlines about its massive in-game conflicts involving tens of
And is this a Munin? Is it a Munin?
thousands of players, and its incredibly realistic in-game financial system, which can make
big old space battles. It's great that I can talk about this now because I've been an EVE Cardi for a long time. It's great that they're testing 400 player servers. I never thought they'd get past 200, let alone even capable of testing 400. So the future's bright when it comes to player counts. Insane to think that we might even get battles with 200 players. That's insanity. I never thought we'd get close to that. Bold of them to do those tests. I wonder how they went. I heard they didn't go so well. Love that I can talk about that now, even though I signed the NDAs. Fascinating. Here's to hoping that Star Citizen can capture those big, huge space fleet battles we all crave with reasonable performance.
losing a virtual spaceship just as consequential as losing a phone or a car in the real world. Countless magazines and even much more.
See, this is the thing, like these videos, these like magazine articles, you don't get that with a generic MMO. You don't get that when the economy is already scripted. It's when the players and the community organizations control the script and they control the relationships of that economy. That's when things get fascinating. That's when story happens. That's when you go to Star Citizen subreddit to look at something besides a screenshot. It's where you can get players and pirates depending on, PvE players, and it creates a symbiotic relationship. But, there's just so much potential here, and I feel like it's just not being captured.
Successful YouTube channels have talked about these two factors individually, But where I think they get really interesting is where they merge together. For a game about spaceships set 21,000 years in the future, EVE is surprisingly realistic. And that realism extends to these massive wars in the sense that they are expensive. The in
It's kind of similar to, oh my gosh, I'm having a mind blank, but there's a World War II game, Foxhole, that's it, that is like heavily logistics dependent, and you're like constantly moving resources around the map to manage the war effort. I love that aspect. You know, light fighters relying on capital ships to get them from system to system based off their short fuel tank, small fuel tanks, stuff like this. So fascinating when logistics meets the economy. And I'm just concerned because Quanta could handle all of this, or 90% of this. So it just feels cheap, bland. I love the idea of all of this.
in-game currency called ISK has an approximate exchange rate of $6 per billion in-game ISK. Although it must be mentioned that trading this in-game currency directly back and forth for real-life money is actually against the rules of the game, for now at least, and will get you banned.
Yeah, they since walked this back. Now they sell ISK by the trillions daily, so not so much. But that's what happens when Pearl Abyss acquires your company. They'll milk it dry. So it's a shame because people raved about the EVE Online economy so much, and I think a lot of the research that went into it from university professors and stuff kind of died off immediately as soon as CCP started selling ISK as much as they did.
Even still, this shows that in-game assets have a very tangible real-world value on the gray market. So when you see headlines about trillions of ISK being lost in one of these epic battles, it gives you an idea of just how expensive it can be to wage entire wars in EVE Online. But this all begs a question. Who or what funds these wars? With a price tag of hundreds of thousands of real-world dollars and nothing but virtual space pride in return, it doesn't sound like a very good deal, right? Well, it's time to learn how space money works, and if you enjoy this video, please consider liking and subscribing for new videos like this one made every week. Okay, so there are 3 interesting and unique ways that major wars
And Rust we trust
have been funded over the past 2 decades that this game has existed. But let's start with the most basic one. This game is home to a selection of mega corporations that are run entirely by players, similar in many ways to
Oh, look, they're using World of Warcraft as an example.
guilds in World of Warcraft, only on a much larger scale. Now, the largest of these corporations effectively run like nation states. They have defined borders, a standing military, taxation, industry, and of course, command structures.
Oh my god, this is so good. Oh, we need this kind of stuff.
These large institutions will inevitably butt heads with other similar entities over resources, territory, or, just for fun.
Oh man. Territory control with the bases. So they mentioned like passive mining and stuff tied to the base building. You guys saw that in the preview at CitizenCon. Man, if planting your base at a risky, high risk biome to harvest minerals and resources has an impact on the economy and then an impact on PvP that happens against these bases and then territory as a knock-on effect. Holy moly, we're in a good place. I doubt they'll capture that, but man, I'd love that.
At the end of the day, it is a video game, so the reasons to go to war can simply be to entertain the members of these corporations. Now, what will normally happen is that these individual participants in these wars need to provide their own combat ships, funded out of the money they make in the game themselves. But if these ships are lost in battle, the mega corporations will pay to replace them. They do this because ultimately they will need manpower to win these wars. Ensuring that people aren't too afraid of losing their ships means
I love the idea of an org wallet. I think he's going to refer to war bonds here, but yeah, I love the idea that the organization reimburses you to go PvP against your organization's enemies. I love like that ecosystem in EVE Online between corporations, alliances, the objectives they want to achieve, and then players going out and playing. It's like a player logs in, he doesn't just go and pick up quests from quest givers. He goes and achieves the organization's goals for the week, for the month. and he gets paid to do so by his friends and management in his own organization. That's player-driven content. That is like the most awesome thing about these space games, and I hope that, I hope Star Citizen isn't the experience where it's like you log on and you go do missions for the CDF, the Civilian Defense Force, so that you can get some reputation with them. Like, let's give a lot of this to the players. Let them craft this, I think.
That their players...
Not saying I'm against it, but I like the idea that maybe the null-sec security systems are more about players, the community storytelling, rather than just factions and NPC standings, stuff like this.
Will keep logging in and YOLOing into these devastating space battles. Now, these ship replacement programs, or SRP, will often be funded by the taxes collected from these corporations during times of relative peace. The industrialists get given a safe and secure piece of territory to conduct their business, and in return, they need to pay a portion of their profits to a central authority.
Oh my god, yes. Like, imagine logistics and trade organizations having actual deals with security and piracy organizations. Oh my god, yes.
Which will then fund a military program to maintain or potentially even expand this protected territory. Effectively, it's exactly the same as what happens with every government ever in the real world. Now, this is fine in theory, but oftentimes these industrial entities don't have the capacity to wage war themselves. In these circumstances, they can call on mercenary entities that do nothing but wage war on other people's behalf for a fee. Again, not overly dissimilar as to what happens from time to time in the real world, with military contract corporations like Academy performing a very similar function. Now, so far we've been looking at the relatively minor wars, the ones that might be a big deal to the players of the game, and the shit posters on r/Eve, but are not exactly that remarkable to an uninvolved...
The Eve subreddit is a beautiful thing, because you log on to it and you see interesting discussions, or you used to see interesting discussions, like organizations falling apart, the story changing, deals, backstabbing, betrayals, all this jazz. It was heavily about the game. The Star Citizen subreddit I despise, because it's just screenshots and talking of the development. It's never about the game and the economy, nothing like that. It's not interesting. There's no new story getting told. Just I'm ready to play a game.
onlooker like you or I. But this all changed around 5 years ago. You see, Eve's economy is so realistic and so diverse that at one point there were virtual casinos in the game. These were founded, funded, and operated entirely by regular players using the in-game currency. Of course,
I've got a friend that was very close to this time frame of EVE Online, and told me a lot of stories about this casino stuff and how he waged a war, or they waged a war on him. So very fascinating. Love this. I love this. I'm pretty sure it's illegal in some countries, which is why they had to police it, because it kind of was considered like online gambling, so to speak. But super cool.
These casinos generated massive profits, just like most of them do in the real world. Now, these in-game profits were great and all, but there really wasn't much that they could do with them on an individual level. That kind of money can buy every spaceship in the game many times over, so they needed something grander to put their money towards. The logical answer was to sell the in-game money for real-world money, whether it was allowed or not. Sure.
I love the B-roll that he's found for all of this.
They risked getting banned from a video game, but the collective total of ISK that these casinos generated was worth millions of dollars. So, that was a risk that a lot of these casino owners were willing to take. This was especially convenient, given that the thousands of transactions that the casinos handled daily were the perfect cover for in-game money laundering. It was almost impossible to distinguish between transactions that were legitimate and those that weren't. Again, very similar to casinos in the real world, which are continually in the news for being centers of money laundering. However, the more honorable casino owners decided to use their space dollars to buy something not available on the public market: influence. 2016 kicked off the so-called Casino Wars, as the I Want ISK online casino funded a coalition of players to wage war on the single most powerful corporation
We know all about this.
In the game at the time, which had wronged the casino in a previous business deal. In reality, All of these other player-run organizations were looking for any excuse to go to war in an attempt to bring the Imperium, as it's known, in check. They simply lacked the financial backing to undertake such a significant challenge. But with the casinos writing the checks as a way to prove a point as to what happens when you dishonor a business deal, one of the most devastating wars in the game's history was enabled, which in turn gave us PC Gamer articles about spectacular space battles. And yes, the financing behind it might have been a little less spectacular, but that doesn't mean that it's any less interesting. Now, shortly following this war, the developers of EVE Online decided to put an end to these player-run casinos. Now, they said they had their own reasons, but most players speculate that it was a combination of wanting to cut down on the trade of in-game money for real money, and also as a response to player backlash over these entities having too much power over the game. What this meant was that in 2020, there was a new funding model required. The old belligerents from the casino war were ready to go at it again, only this time a few things were different. For starters, the casinos were no more, which meant that no side would have limitless funding to them. What's more is that 2020 was a year of working from home with no other options for entertainment besides sitting in front of a computer playing video games. This was all shaping up to create potentially the largest conflict in the game's history. A conflict that would also be the most costly. The most crucial battles during this conflict were inevitably going to be decided by who could bring the largest ships in the game to bear. The Titans.
I love the idea that, Bengal carriers, whatever I'm missing out on, Idris and the one in between, the Javelins, sorry. I like the idea of them being just absolute, area control dominant. I really dislike the idea that even though these gigantic ships are around, that they'll be, they'll be easily avoidable or just in their own weight class where they're not a concern. They need their targets too. And I love the idea that, fights escalate to a certain degree. Like maybe org wars start at the low side aspect where people are only committing light fighters and fighters in general, and then it escalates to all in because of the economic impact, and then people bring out capital ships. I like the idea that losing a capital ship is devastating for an organization. It sets them back a huge amount in the economy, and then rebuilding it is a monumental task. Stuff like this, rather than a 5-minute claim time because you spent $2,000. I hate the idea that there are players out there with fleets of $50,000 that are supposed to outfit 5,000 players, and they expect to call upon that power and be able to use that power at the fingertips of themselves. It's ridiculous. I like the idea that it takes even 20 players to get a capital ship off the ground, rather than single seat heroes with NPC crews, which just cheapens the idea of capital ships anyways. I like the idea of if you run into a capital ship, oh wow, because it's operated by an organization rather than some rich guy who paid for it with USD and he's got 100 NPCs in there, for example. Just a wild example, but yeah. I really hope that these big ships and the way they interact, that when they blow up, stuff like that, has massive impacts on the economy. God, it needs to happen. These are some serious concerns I have. And is it just me? You guys let me know in the comments. Are you guys worried about this? Because I am terrified of this. The closer the game gets to built, the further away from a game economy we have. It's not good. We do not have a functioning economy, man. I really despise this lack of it feeling like a game. UEC is pointless. Once you reach a certain threshold, you're only thinking about maintenance, and that's it. You have no further use for UEC at all. Just don't enjoy it. It's so bad.
Ships.
It's the worst economy in any game I've ever played.
Are extremely powerful, and were at least up until recently extremely rare. But changes in the game in recent years had meant that these industrial powerhouses could produce these once legendary ships as if they're Ford Model Ts. This didn't mean that they were any less expensive, however. It just meant that the powers that be had to bring more of them to keep up with their opposition. The side that had been previously funded by the casinos were happy to fund this war in the traditional way, using the tax money they had collected over the years of peace and prosperity to foot the bill for these battles. But the Imperium had a better idea. They had seen how finance had decided their fate in 2016, and were keen to ensure they were economically dominant going into the War of 2020.
Here we go.
So, they once again looked to reality for inspiration. War bonds are often issued by governments
There we go, I called it. Hilarious.
during periods of all-out conflict. This is because modern wars are expensive, and raising taxes is often impossible if the entire economy has been dedicated towards the war effort. So, government bonds are issued so that people can invest their money in their own nation's victory. The Imperium did exactly this. They sold off a series of bonds that would pay interest to their own members. This was obviously great for the Imperium itself because it got the much needed capital injection it needed to go off and fight the war, but it was also great for the members of the group as well. Scams and financial fraud are commonplace in EVE, and there is no regulation about taking someone's stuff and never giving it back. In fact, these types of swindles are probably the thing that EVE is third best known for.
There we go, yes.
But while having a totally unregulated financial system is great for cool stories, it's terrible for investing. Because, well, anything you invest can and likely will just be stolen off you. So,
Yep.
why bother? These war bonds presented an opportunity for players to invest in an asset that didn't have quite the same risk of being stolen. For clarity, the Imperium would be fully within their rights to turn around and tell these investors to get stuffed, but the hit to their entity's reputation would likely not be worth it, especially if they ever wanted to sell war bonds again to fund future wars. Now, that doesn't mean that these in-game financial instruments are totally without risk. If the Imperium gets destroyed in this ongoing war, well then, these bonds aren't going to get paid. In the real world, credit analysts call this sovereign risk, and it's no less important here as it is in the land of internet spaceships. But for now at least, this war is still ongoing, and it's likely to provide gaming magazines and aspiring YouTube channels alike many more things to talk about, like the fact that this game's financial markets predicted the short squeeze on GameStop. So make sure to like and subscribe if you want to see us make a video on that. And in the meantime, go and watch our video to find out if the World Bank is really an evil empire. Thanks for learning how money works.
Man, gosh, it's good. Imagine if Star Citizen had that kind of complexity, that those many layers of relationships all tied to UEC. Instead, it's very few relationships tied to USD. So, man, I really hope that Star Citizen and this economy team steer this game in the direction where we can call it a game and, create a storyline that unfolds and changes rapidly with the community that plays it. And I worry about how generic the simulated idea of Quanta will be. That's my concern. What do you guys think? Man, that was a good video. I love the idea of war efforts, war logistics, war bonds, taxing from organizations, alliances, deals gone bad, deals that are good, symbiotic relationships between different playstyles. It's just the coolest thing ever. It makes things interesting. And the thing about this kind of stuff, right, is it makes not only playing the game itself a really interesting and fun, but keeping up to date with this story that's unfolding and that tied to the economy. Going to the Star Citizen subreddit and finding out what's happening in the verse, rather than us all being on, gosh, I forgot the word, like tunnel, right? Like we're all on the same tracks going in the same direction and there's no deviation. I love the idea of a player-driven economy. I think I might be the bad guy when it comes to that. Like, am I too far off base when it comes to wanting that, guys? Or is that something you guys feel too? I'm very curious to see what you think. I feel like I'm kind of alone in this aspect, or it might not be as popular as I wish it was, the idea of a player-driven economy. That's the question of the day, boys. What do you think? Quanta, how happy are we with it? Player-driven economy, no? Yes? What do you guys think? 1, 2, 3, if you got this far, I appreciate you guys all. I definitely will ramp up the videos, especially when it comes to gameplay fairly soon, yeah? I'll catch you guys in the next video. I appreciate you all, especially those guys in the comments. Let's get in there. I look forward to reading it. GG's. Peace.